Hi, good evening. I'm Lonnie Stonich, the Executive Director of FAN, and I'm honored to welcome you to tonight's conversation between Professor Christine Porath and Douglas Conant. FAN is a nonprofit organization that presents a high-quality speaker series offered free to the public on a wide variety of topics, including human development, mental health, education, and social justice, among others. We have over 175 videos of past events archived on our website and our YouTube channel, so please be sure to explore. And now some introductions. Christine Porath is a tenured professor at Georgetown University's McDonough School of Business. She's the author of the incredible book, Mastering Civility, a manifesto for the workplace, and co-author of The Cost of Bad Behavior. Her latest book, Mastering Community, The Surprising Ways Coming Together, moves us from surviving to thriving, was just published in 2022. Professor Porath is a frequent contributor to the Harvard Business Review and has written articles for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, McKinsey Quarterly, and the Washington Post. She frequently delivers talks and has taught in various executive programs at Harvard University, Georgetown, and USC. Prior to position at Georgetown, she was a faculty member at the University of Southern California's Marshall School of Business. A devoted leadership practitioner and teacher, Douglas Conant's 45-year career has been defined by achieving high performance through an intentional commitment to studying, practicing, improving, and spreading the tenets of leadership that works. He is founder and CEO of Conant Leadership, former president and CEO of Campbell's Soup Company, former president of Nabisco Foods, and former chairman of Avon Products. His Wall Street Journal best-selling book, co-authored with Amy Fetterman, The Blueprint, 6 Practical Steps to Lift Your Leadership to New Heights, is a seminal treatise on leadership and a practical guide for leading effectively in a chaotic world. A Glencoe, Illinois native, Mr. Conant is a graduate of New Trier High School, one of our sponsors, and the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University, and served as the chairman of the Kellogg Executive Leadership Institute for 5 years. So welcome home, Mr. Conant. And now let's welcome Christine Porath and Douglas Conant.
Thank you very much. Chris.
Yeah. Yes.
What she didn't mention was that you also are an avid sports enthusiast, and you played sports at Holy Cross, I believe. Basketball and soccer, and you've done a lot of work with athletes, and that's probably informed all of your work, not just from the study of it, but also from the practice of competing and preparing to compete, and then trying to recover after competing, and then trying to function as a team. So I would imagine all of that sports activity has informed your work. Would you agree with that?
Definitely. Yeah, I love sports. I love being around it. I love watching it. I love doing as many of them as possible still. So it's been an important part of my life. And I agree. I think that, I apply certainly the lessons learned have served me very well personally, but have allowed me some insight into how leaders work and can work, and how teams and organizations and communities can work better together.
Yeah, I think we'll touch on it as we start talking about mastering community. I think a lot of that work is going to drift into this conversation in one way, shape, or form. But it's great to be with you. I've known Chris for several years, but yet we've never met. We're ships passing in the virtual night. I think this audience is in for a real treat, because this book is I think just what the doctor ordered right now. Our lives seem to be so highly pressurized, and we're all thinking about, how am I going to navigate my journey, my individual journey? How am I going to get through all this? And it seems like the answer may be, it's not about you. It's about helping build community, and then you'll find your way. So we'll get to that. I'd love to ask the first question, just to prime the pump here. There are several case studies of thriving communities in your book, and they're driven by top leaders dedicated to improvement and maintenance of a rich, healthy environment. Can mid-level contributors, managers, or any employee for that matter, affect change using your approach? Can you manage up community? Can you create community? How do you do that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's having the mindset that you can make a difference and start anywhere. So one of the examples that I included in Mastering Community, which I loved, comes from a woman I really admire, Carla Pinheiro-Sublet, and she's now the CMO of IBM. But at the time, the story was she was managing a call center for Dell, young employee, and she realized that people were gaining a lot of weight very quickly, 15 pounds in like the first month and a half. And she decided after gaining weight herself that to start a program for working out at lunchtime. And she funded it, and it became really successful. People became very active. They were far healthier. Performance went up 25%. And people were walking across campus to join this program. And so I think it was a great example that showed that, even at a young age for her, kind of like, her first management experience of a small call center, to start a program that grew into something global, that was called Thrive, really took off. But she tried it and it worked and it grew and flourished. And I think that that's the kind of story, whether you're starting a program on the weekend, weekend warriors, or, going out and doing something wonderful for the community, Habitat for Humanity, any cause you choose. I think it can start with a small tribe or group, and you flourish together and thrive. And so I'd say, try it.
Yeah, it's interesting. It seems like so many of us are waiting for someone else to create the community and then we'll join it.
Yeah.
But there's an enormous amount of opportunity for us to take initiative where we are within the things we can control and start to do something that can energize us, but serve our colleagues, our families, our communities. You and I have stumbled across dozens and dozens of examples of people starting to focus on small things that have gotten traction and exploded into big things. One of which might be a story that you shared with me about your brother Mike, and he started with his own family.
Yeah.
And now, my gosh, it's exploded. Could you maybe share a little of that story with us?
Sure. Yeah. So Mike, my brother, and the Mighty, which is an organization he started, really were the inspiration for Mastering Community. And as you described, I saw kind of what happened when you start building and you have a vision and, you bring in good people and things like that. But this really began when he and his wife, Sarah, got some really devastating news about their then 2-year-old daughter, Annabelle, who had a very rare chromosome disorder. And, they hadn't known what was driving, some of the developmental, kind of time that it was taking her. And it turned out that once they got the answer, there just wasn't a lot of information out there for them. And so Mike Googled, Dupe 15, and he ended up finding a PDF file that was about a decade old with 6 stories from parents that were raising children with rare diseases and other disorders, and they were suffering a lot, but there was also joy and humor in these stories. And what he realized was if those parents could do it, maybe he and Sarah could as well. And it turned out after another parenting challenge that he resorted to Google, and it turned out a Dupe 15 mom actually answered, how to help Annabelle learn how to master the pincher grasp and learn how to feed herself, that he realized that so many of these health answers were not from physicians or experts, but rather, parents and other caregivers that were, struggling with some of the same things. And so it led him, with a journalist background, to found this Mighty, the digital media company, that has since grown into serving millions of members now. And it's just really answered so many people's needs. But one of the many, many things that I learned from him was that initially he thought he was solving for people's health problems or issues that they were challenged with. And what he's realized is that he was really solving for isolation and loneliness. And so many of us can relate to that, even at a basic level. And so I just thought it was a wonderful story of what can be done and can help people when you do, take some risks and start with even a small group, and then, try to master community.
And my observation, it's a wonderful story. I encourage everybody to buy the book. And if you don't have time to read it all, just read the first chapter. It is inspiring stuff. And I would argue there's no risk. That young lady who started Thrive, or Mike, he tried.
Yeah.
And what if it didn't work? He would have tried something else.
Right.
That young lady, the exercise at noon didn't work. Let's try something else. I would argue there's really not a lot of risk here if you start small and you try and do it in a way that's relevant to your colleagues or your family. And so Mike started small. He found one other person who could help him wrestle this issue with Annabelle. And that one person became two people, and now they're in dialogue with millions of people. And all of these people are in these unique situations where they feel lost. Mm-hmm. And they feel dependent on the experts and the doctors, but they're not feeling connected to community. And I love your notion that it transcends just the physical health issues. I mean, my impression is throughout your book, you're treating the whole person. Yeah. The head, heart, and spirit of that person, as well as whatever physical things need to be addressed. And all of a sudden they feel energy. Mm-hmm. and they have a place to go, and they have people to connect with, and then they have ways of giving back. Very, very inspiring stuff. Have you got another story for us before I move on to another question?
Sure. We can go to the end if you want. Finding Ubuntu.
Let's do that. I love that.
was one that I think that you enjoyed. One of many sports stories in there, but the idea of the Boston Celtics and Doc Rivers actually running into a former colleague, classmate of his at a board meeting, and she happened to say this word, Ubuntu, which spoke to him. And he was returning to a Celtics team that had just come off of one of the worst seasons in NBA history. They had lost 9 of 15 players, and they were, going to be struggling. And so he really felt like this idea of a sense of belonging, a sense of interconnectedness could potentially transform the team. And they really, lived it. They broke the huddles with that cry. They wore bracelets and shirts and really just lived it, though, meaning, respected each other, picked each other up in the highs and lows, celebrated success, learned from defeats, all of that good stuff. And they went on to turn things around, and they actually won the NBA championship the following year with the biggest turnaround swing in NBA history. And I just thought it was a great example of we can steal some of these tactics, and apply them. And as you pointed out too, we can do this not only together, but if you want to work on yourself because you're not feeling a sense of belonging or interconnectedness, that's something that I've seen people do. And it can be as simple as taking small steps, like putting your phone down, and tuning in, or for a weekend and really recharging with your family or your friends, or taking a hike in nature, but this idea of coming together and really trying to connect is, I think, an important topic for today, moving us forward so that we help move us from surviving to thriving.
I love that. And the one of the messages I took away from your book is that you can start small. Mm-hmm. And it can be manageable. I mean, the Celtics had a big turnaround, but I don't know how many players are on a team, 15? Or, it's not like you've got thousands of people, you can start small with what you have where you are and try things and do it with an eye on creating this spirit of Ubuntu, this spirit of community.
Mhm.
And I think you and I've talked about this before, but I'm from Chicago. Many of our listeners are from Chicago, and I actually lived there in Winnetka and went to the bookstall. When Michael Jordan and the Bulls were playing,
Mhm.
and Phil Jackson was trying to, he had a bunch of thoroughbreds, and he was trying to create this sense of community there, and with a handful of players.
Mhm.
And he took these individual contributors and put them together, created the sense of community where people understood roles, felt supported, and felt expected to support each other, and did some pretty amazing things. So anyway,
Yeah.
you're familiar.
Yeah, one of those stories that I think you liked with respect to Phil Jackson too was this idea of how he really united the team. And he started with the idea of his film room, which was decorated with Native American artifacts, and really referred to them as a tribe, and wanted them to connect that way. And I found it really interesting that they would start every day in the film room, but it was not about basketball. These guys were he would have them reading books, he would have them talking about ethics, he challenged them in different ways. But I just love the way that players still talk about those times. Steve Kerr was referring to, it was the tightest team that he ever was a part of that way. And 12th man felt just as big a part of the team as anyone else. And I think this idea of they were comfortable toasting each other, Steve Kerr said, but during the season, they were comfortable crying in front of each other. It was just a really vulnerable, safe space, which we know is easier said than done in organizations, but I think is really what we're encouraging leaders to do today now, is to bring people together, get them to connect, get them to feel comfortable, create that sense of trust and safety that will really get people sharing their ideas, bringing their best selves, able to contribute their best, and feeling really great about the team as a whole.
Right. And in the Bulls case, you had these athletes who had never been spoken to like this, right? I mean, he's talking Native American spiritual conversation with people who had just been playing AAU basketball for their whole lives and came from disadvantaged situations. And he drew them in and created a sense of community and culture there. That was the single most important thing. And then he found ways to leverage their talents to actually have them performing on the court in a way that was extraordinary. So, but anyway, the world is filled with it. I know in my life, I've had the same kind of challenges in the workspace and also in the nonprofit space, trying to create this sense of community. I'm going to sort of move on to that now. And you write that early in your career, you worked in what you thought was your dream job. I think we all had that, okay, I've got it. I'm 27 and I'm in my dream job already.
Right.
But you were in a culture that turned out to be rampant with bullying, rudeness, and disrespect. You also share the case study of a CEO, I think I know who it is, who inherited an extremely toxic culture. If a person believes that they work in a toxic environment, is there any way to remedy it? Or is leaving the only option? I have a strong point of view on that, but this is not my show. This is yours. So I'm gonna give you the first shot at it. But many people are reluctant to leave a role, especially one that they otherwise enjoy, when they are not the problem. How would you sort of develop that thought?
Well, I think the important thing is that you focus on you and what you can control. You may not be able to control the other person, particularly because a lot of times, at least when we're studying this, it comes from people with more power or status than us. And so I think it's important. We found the one thing that tends to really protect people or buffer them from a lot of these negative effects is a sense of thriving, which is hard to imagine when you're, in those situations, but, can you feel like you're moving forward? Identify areas of growth and actively pursue development. That might be something outside of work. It might be, classes, education, might be developing a new hobby or something like that. But looking for ways to innovate, whether it's, again, at work or outside of work, turning to a mentor that can help you navigate the situation better and provide you with some support. I think the biggest thing that I believe in, which may not be a surprise given what we've talked about, is really taking care of yourself and managing your energy. So this idea of, exercise is huge. It's, pumping hope molecules into your system. So that's helpful. You may work out depression and things like that, kind of feed yourself with exercise. I think sleep is key, so that you feel better, you can respond better to things. Even things like nutrition and stress management, yoga, meditation, mindfulness, whatever works for you, but really tuning in and trying to manage that stress as best as possible, I think is huge. And ideally, you're finding a sense of meaning or purpose. And so often we find that thriving outside of work can be really a good thing to focus on, because then you're building up your resiliency, your strength. And so you'll bring a stronger, more resilient, happier, healthier self back into your organization, let's say, or your community. And that's helpful, because then you're kind of protecting yourself as best as possible. So it's a little bit of a proactive approach, I would say, to kind of, you may catch the virus, but hopefully it's not as bad, because you're taking care of yourself so well, those kind of things. And easier said than done. But I think the idea of focusing on you and what you can control and your sense of moving forward despite any challenges is probably, what I have found to be most helpful to people. How about you, though?
Well, I remember sitting in a meeting. I was in the audience 1,000 years ago, and this motivational speaker was up there, and this person said, there are 10 two-letter words, and then he had on the screen just underlined two-letter, there were no words, just underlines, 10 two-letter words that will help you navigate your life, just 10. And everybody's thinking, what in the world is this person talking about? And the 10 two-letter words were, if it is to be, it is up to me. And the notion was that you needed to take ownership over your journey. And in my life, as you know, I've studied a lot, and I spent a lot of time with Stephen Covey 1,000 years ago. And he used to talk about, the things you can control, the things you can influence, and then the things that are beyond your control. And he used to always urge us to be aware of the world at large, but really focus on the things we could control. And as we began to master that, our influence would grow because we would be stronger and healthier. So in all my work, I've sort of landed on this philosophy that this is an inside-out process. You have to take care of yourself, and then you can help others. And if you're not taking care of yourself, you're at risk. And that's what I loved about your example of the woman who created Thrive. Mm-hmm. She was dealing with her own issues. And as she started thinking about it, she found a way to leverage that to help others in her immediate control, the people she could influence. She focused on her circle of control, the people she could influence, and then it just spread like wildfire. So this notion of taking care of yourself first is a powerful one. And, I suspect you know this. Small steps, James Clear's work on atomic habits. I think he's been on this program before. Taking these small steps that you can actually act on and bring to life in your everyday life, just meditation, mindfulness, can transform how you sort of engage in the world. So those small steps can be incredibly powerful. You have some examples of those small things in your book. Maybe you'd like to highlight a few.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of, even the movement idea, we hit on exercise, but like we don't always feel like it or have the energy to. But I think that that's one thing that ends up kind of feeding us in multiple ways. And we show up differently when we're able to do that. And so I think that that's, one that makes a lot of sense for people to start. I think even the idea of fueling ourselves, recovery wise, taking breaks, which, so many people are suffering from burnout these days. I think that that's huge. So, whether that's scheduling slightly tighter meetings or stepping outside, Tony Schwartz has found this idea of like 90 minutes is, kind of where we hit a threshold cognitively. So like beyond that, most people aren't functioning real well. So kind of planning and scheduling small breaks, even if it's just a step away for 10 minutes, or, ideally you get some sunlight or get outside, but even if you don't, movement and stepping away, kind of recharging, I think is such an important topic these days that we need to find ways to do that, both in, I'd say, short bite-sized pieces, small bite-sized pieces, but also, larger times as well, is a huge part and probably something that, we're going to need to focus on coming out of this pandemic and stuff, because I think the burnout numbers are quite high.
Yeah, we're all learning how to deal with a new reality. And we're finding that the old ways are insufficient. Right. So, Darwin was right. We either grow or die. And we suggest people choose the former, not the latter. No, that's great. Now, you detail 4 areas in which people can improve and thrive. You talk about self-awareness, physical well-being, recovery, and mindset. If a person wants to improve themselves but doesn't know where to start, where would you start among those 4? Self-awareness, I suspect, or?
Yes, exactly. Okay. Yeah, I would, because I think especially when it comes to things like thriving or leading others, you really have to, and I know this is consistent, I think, with your blueprint approach, but you really have to know yourself, and where are your strengths, where are your weaknesses, what do you need to focus on, areas of improvement. But self-awareness is really kind of a bridge in the Mastering Community book, because you look at like the culture that you want, but then, how do you bring your best self to it? And so figuring out what you need to work on, is, whether it's thriving or something else, is really important, because that's going to affect how you interact with others, and ultimately your effectiveness, and your ability to make the changes, that we've talked about, that you're striving for. So I think that's, an area of focus first, and then some of the other things that will follow.
Is there one that's sort of chronically overlooked of those 4? I mean, the self-awareness, or which?
Yeah. I mean, yes, self-awareness definitely is. If you look at the statistics of 95% of people think they're self-aware, only 10 to 15% are. I'd say the area that I think is, doesn't get much press these days, and yet is so important to us, is mindset. I think we've gotten better on recovery, for example. I think that wasn't talked about a lot for a while, but mindset, I just think, is so important for us to be functioning well, especially, coming out of this. And I love the idea. And again, I've used sports examples in the book for some of these, but this idea of neutral mindset in particular is one that I stole from the late Trevor Moawad, who really spent his career coaching athletes and then was pivoting to organizations as well. But I love the idea of, and it gets at control what you can control, but it's concentrating on that next play. It's just focusing on what you control the next moment. So it's not being hijacked by past mistakes or issues or, bad calls or the woe is me kind of thing. It's what can I do in this next step to help us achieve our goals. And so also not getting too far ahead of ourselves as well. And, fears of the future and what could happen or what might happen. But I just really like that idea. And again, I think it's, very timely these days. And also the idea of, paying attention to what you're taking in, which I think is crucial these days also, because, it's a somewhat negative time, I'd say. And there's a lot of that out there. Yeah. Not saying anything. I didn't promise to bring anything new to this program tonight.
No.
But yeah.
The Carol Dweck out at Stanford, we talk about mindset, and she wrote the book on the growth mindset, right?
Yeah.
I mean, she's the person you go to when you really want to get into the depths of the growth mindset that she talks about. And it feels like, and that basically, I'm going to really shortcut this. The growth mindset is, if you think you can grow, you'll grow. I mean, it's really that simple, but it's much more complex. And it's really, if anyone's interested in it, they should explore it. But it feels like this pandemic has sort of destroyed or compromised our mindset, in that we don't think we can do anything about it. We feel like there's this tsunami of the pandemic, economic woes, political unrest, DEI issues. One thing, a war in the Ukraine. What's next? What am I going to do? And so my observation would be that many of us probably feel like, I'm just a victim in this. I'm part of the sea of victims here. I'm doing the best I can. I'm hanging on, but I would observe, and I think I don't know if you'd agree, that the people who think they can grow through this, who are determined to find a way that's manageable for them in their circle of control, are actually finding ways to learn and grow, and to build a little better community today than it would have been had they not been trying to do it. Yeah. And I see lots of stories of people thriving, like the woman who started Thrive, or like Mike. Yeah. Now, on the other hand, they're working like crazy and they're wearing themselves out, and they have to manage all the things you highlight in terms of being aware of what's working and what's not working for them, and how they take care of themselves so they can continue to do their work. But I don't know, it's the growth mindset is also feels like part of the answer, but it's hard to get there in today's world. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. I love that book Mindset as well. And I think the growth mindset is such an important concept, but especially for communities, individuals too. But I think this idea of, if you want to see change in organizations, like Microsoft was an example that I loved, how they've used that idea of a growth mindset to really improve in terms of outcomes, and it's working. It seems like. So I think that there are plenty of great examples out there of really encouraging it and reinforcing it is a way to kind of spark us and spur us forward, to move us from surviving to thriving. But you got to believe. I mean, I think that is also a message that we're both talking about. You have to, kind of start somewhere and believe you can do it. And it may be small steps, and it may be 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but then you got to focus on that next step forward kind of thing. And control what you can control in the moment.
I think you talk about it, you basically encourage people to pull a Gandhi and be the change you want to see in the world. Yeah. And to do that, you sort of got to be aware of what you hunger to do, and then you've got to start to act on it, I guess. And start to manifest that change with the people whom you're traveling. And one thing leads to the next, I guess. Is that, am I getting that right?
Yeah, and that quote is actually in the bridge to part 2 of the book, because
Okay.
I think that that's the focus is, especially then this grew out of some of the civility work that I was doing. I think it becomes very easy to kind of point the finger and say, they have it all wrong. They're jerks. They're making my life miserable. They're bringing me down. It's really hard. But I think, what we've talked about is this idea of, be the change that you want to see. And it doesn't matter if you have power or not, just start doing it. And what we have found is that, and this is from social network studies, where you're seeing how does this spread, let's say in an organization, in a community, in a IT group, whatever the case may be. But we see that really small actions have an effect on then how people feel and how they treat the next person. And so it's so important that we just take those small actions. You talk about touch points, for example, and this idea of, if you ask people how you help or listen attentively, all of those things, smile and say hello, they matter. They value, people value them a lot. I mean, you're famous for your thank you notes as well, and how they lift people up, and people are talking about them for years and years afterwards. And so I think, that idea of, we may think that these are really small things and people might not notice or might not make a big deal of it, but really these things can matter a lot to people, especially these days, where many people aren't feeling great. And so providing that lift for people can really spark the kind of change that we want to see, even though we feel like, it's so small. Is it really going to make a difference? But it's powerful in terms of the multiplier effects in these networks, whether they're at work or outside of work. They matter. And so that, I guess the message is, be the change that you want to see.
And someone, I wish I was, I wish I had thought of all these wonderful sayings, but I haven't, but I pay attention to them. The observation is, the more you give, the more you get. The more you give of yourself, the more that comes back to you. And I get the fact that we feel as if we're pouring from an empty cup. So it's hard to keep giving when you don't feel like you're getting. But in all the work we've done at Conant Leadership, we're finding that if you're not getting, then give more, because you will get. And which is sort of seems counterintuitive, but I would argue it's probably the only way out. So, I stumbled on this. You and I, we've done work together on civility, and in fact, you may want to talk about that a little bit before we go any further. You did some wonderful work. The big breakthrough book was Mastering Civility, which was coming on the heels of the 90s and the early 2000s, where greed was good, and it was when I say jump, don't say why, just say how high. It was all about tough-minded leadership and tough-minded support, and you better have a damn thick skin. And you and I both felt, well, there's got to be a better way here. And you really uncovered it with your research. You might want to talk a little bit about that and talk about how that got you to, mastering community. But first, you focused on mastering civility, right?
Yeah, and that was in large part due to my own work experiences and what I had seen family go through as well, just the toll it can take on people. And so I wanted to focus on showing as objectively as possible, what are the costs for, these rude interactions people may have, or even witnessing it. And so it led me down a path to study what are the costs of incivility, let's say, or disrespect. And then, I didn't want to stop there. I wanted to encourage us to move beyond neutral and kind of show the positives of how civility pays. And so it was important to me that to be able to show as objectively as possible why it matters, and why even individuals as leaders, because I was getting a lot of cynicism,
Right.
even from MBAs about, well, that's not the way. Because as you said, it was kind of like, show your power and your status, and then, you will be able to rule. And in fact, I did not believe that, but I kind of felt like show them the numbers, show them the research to help at least nudge them along. And then, I always try to pull in, powerful stories. And so yours, actually, speaking to you, was one of the corporate examples that I used in your idea. You talked about touch points, but I love the idea of how you balanced the turnaround that you led with, as I think, as you described this, tough-minded with standards, tender-hearted with people. And you were able to orchestrate such an amazing turnaround in a huge global company that was really struggling. And I just thought, like, that it's not either or, it's, and the people part is a huge part of the equation that we need to be paying attention to as far as how we treat others. But I wanted it driven not just on a moral argument, because I would like to make that, but I thought, have also the basis of, kind of scientific evidence or, rationale for it pays, literally. It pays for leaders, it pays for organizations, and so forth. So that was the idea behind that.
Well, and it, as we both know, it works. If we just think of ourselves as parents,
Mhm.
if we were just tough on our kids, what kind of child would you raise? And if we were just tender and loving, what kind of child would you raise? And what we endeavor to do is help create a set of standards for our child, which will enable them to flourish, high standards, but also high standards on caring,
Mhm.
and loving. And we do both. And then Jim Collins, when he wrote his best-selling book, Good to Great, best-selling business book of all time, I think, he was the one who created the language for me that was talked about embracing the genius of the
Mhm.
and that's where I started talking about explicitly tough-minded on standards, because we have to have standards to function as a community, but also tenderhearted with people. And we also found with the research that if you didn't focus on winning in the workplace, there was no way you were going to sustainably win in the marketplace.
Mhm.
It just wasn't going to work. You couldn't sustain the community.
Right.
And as we looked under the hood of that, we found out if associates don't believe you care about their agenda, it's a fool's errand to think they're going to care about yours.
Yeah.
And then we talk to these executives and we say, do you realize out of the 1,000 decisions made in your organization today, you're only in the room for one? The other 999 are being made when you're not in the room. And by the time you hear about them, they're going to be reimagined and sound like they're perfect. But these people will be representing themselves, not your agenda, because you have an evidence that you care about their agenda.
Mhm.
And as we got into it, it made sense on a moral level, on a practical level, but then the research bore it out. And now we see that purpose-driven, values-driven organizations are creating better financial returns than these other organizations that aren't as purpose-driven, aren't as values-driven, aren't as caring, because the workforce is into the work and
Mhm.
they're engaged in it. And they're not fearful, all of Amy Edmondson's work
Yeah.
on fear. And so this is coming full circle. And you were one of the first people to really tee it up that way. So,
Well,
and
thank you.
now you've laddered it from this conversation around civility, which just to both of us just made sense, but then you validated it. And now you've laddered it up into basically civility within a larger context of community.
Mhm.
So it's a very, very powerful platform that's finding its way, and quite frankly, long overdue.
Yeah.
Overdue.
Yeah. Well, I hope that it gets more attention. That's certainly the goal of getting this stuff out there. So I hope it's helpful to others. And one of the things that you said struck me about the and, because one of the other pieces that I think we both talk about is this idea of radical candor when we're giving feedback. And, not just because a lot of times I get questions like, and I don't know if it's because they think, oh, Miss Civility, the nice. And it's like, no, I'm not saying it has to be nice, that there's obviously time for challenge, and we want that. And so I always try to point to, I love Kim Scott's work on radical candor, which is you care personally and you challenge directly. And I think I always like to talk about it as like the care personally is like you're planting seeds so that, that when you challenge directly, people aren't as defensive. They're much more likely to take the message and respond in the way that you hope and want. And so I love that. And with radical candor too, the idea of it's not either or, it's both. And you want that, you want people to have strong opinions, to disagree, to have conflict if they need it, certainly to give constructive feedback that may be difficult to hear, but we'd rather have that to be able to raise our game. And so I think, it comes back though to an idea that you mentioned, which was this idea of creating that safe space and uniting people and things like that. Because I think without that, the radical candor is not nearly as likely to happen.
Yeah, Stephen Covey used to talk about the emotional bank account. And basically that's where we're headed here, because, people can hear you with radical candor if you're in the black and with their emotional bank account. If you've built up equity with them and they trust you, they can hear the tough feedback.
Right.
And so the time to provide the caring often is before you need to have the tough conversation.
Yeah.
So the leaders of today that I get exposed to are the ones that are building equity with all their workforce, knowing that at some point they're going to have to make a tough call.
Yeah.
But they're going to get the benefit of the doubt because they built up enough equity, enough in their emotional bank account of the leaders and of the organization, so that the organization will say, well, I don't agree with this, but I'll give this person a pass because I trust that this person has the best intentions for the enterprise and for me as an individual. So the thing we've seen is the people that are leaning into the notion of building community in a civil way before the pandemic are actually doing pretty damn well right now.
Yeah.
Because all of these employees feel like, well, the world doesn't have my back, but my core group within my company, they care about me.
Right.
I want to make sure this works because this is really helping me get through all this craziness. And so what we encourage people to do is just focus on building community, and give. The more you give, the more you get. And if you don't get enough, give more. That's basically what your many stories in the community piece in Mastering Community are all about.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I do think it's the path forward for us. And I believe that will be a competitive advantage, especially coming out of this, that, because people are feeling even more isolated and lonely in large part, that they're really looking for that. And so the organizations or the places that can do that and provide that in meaningful ways, whether or not you're physically located together or you're spread out, I think are the ones that are going to win better talent and be able to, produce better outcomes, but also to have happier, healthier, employees that are thriving and much more likely to stay, which especially in some roles. I was just at a board meeting yesterday around a hospital healthcare system, and this idea of nurses and the staffing problems in healthcare is huge. And so, they were hitting on the idea of community and connection and so forth, because without that, people are really struggling, and, probably no place more than in healthcare and maybe education as well for teachers and things like that. But I really do believe that the places that can embed that strong connection are going to be places where people want to come and where they want to stay, and that will be helpful moving
Yeah,
forward.
well, I believe I was in a near fatal car accident, and I spent a lot of time with nurses, and I've paid a lot of attention to it and devoted a lot of time to that specific community. And I couldn't agree with you more. We're asking more of them.
Mhm.
We need to be giving more to them in terms of the emotional support to get the job done. And I love Lou Shapiro, who's the CEO of the Hospital for Special Surgery in New York. He's all focused on, he wants his nurses and all of his staff to be coming into the hospital. And when they come in feeling safe, when they go out those doors feeling supported. And that's the mantra there.
Yeah.
And the more they lean into it, the greater sense of community they have. And in a really difficult situation in the place that was the epicenter of all of our issues in this country around the pandemic, New York, the week I launched my book in New York on Park Avenue, it's made all the difference. I'd also do work with NYU Langone in New York, and they're leaning into the same proposition, and they're finding that the more we give, the more we get. It's not, and you're not doing it to get something. You're doing that to support the people, and then the people are supporting the agenda more fully because you have their back. I don't know, it makes too much sense to me, but
Yeah, well, and they talk about how, when you're grieving, that actually, whether it's volunteering or this idea of giving, is actually one of the most therapeutic ways out, for yourself psychologically and emotionally and everything else. And so, given how many people are in that place right now, I do think that focus makes a whole lot of sense for so many reasons. But that idea of, pulling yourself out of grief, actually focusing on giving to others. I remember when my mom told me about that, like suggested it to me when I was in a tough spot, and I thought, that really, I was surprised by it, and yet it is true, and you do get that feel good. And we've even found it in research, actually, where especially people that are leaders that are giving in a kind of a mentoring type way, that it leads to their thriving. So you may be afraid to ask people for help in different ways, but you'd be surprised, because for a lot of folks, that's an enjoyable activity, and they derive benefits from giving just as much as receiving, if not more.
Well, we found in the work we do that you're working with leaders or aspiring leaders, and you where you start is, okay, work with one trusted colleague, a platform where you have trust, and find a way to be helpful to that person with one trusted colleague. And they come back and they say, what a difference that made.
Yeah.
What a difference. Well, what if you did another trusted colleague? And we start small and it grows, and they find small ways to make a difference with trusted colleagues, feel safe. Then they get a rhythm to it, and then they can reach out to their teams and to their peers. And, it's one small step. I remember I was working with Deborah Benton, who's written so many books on leadership. I went out to get a tutorial with her way back in the day. And she said, well, Doug, you're an introvert. She was right. It's hard to believe now, but you're an introvert. And as a result, you stand back from conversation. You create extra distance from other people in every situation. I never thought about it, but she was right. She said, this is what I want you to do. I want you to take one step forward, get one step closer to anybody you're engaging, just one step. And I'm here to tell you, it changed my life. Absolutely changed my life. All of a sudden, I was interacting with people. It seemed like a silly thing, but I was like awkwardly close. I actually had to pay attention differently. and I was real careful. And all of a sudden I was engaged in a new way, that one small step. And so what we encourage our leaders to do is just take that one small step with one trusted colleague, with one family member, and you'll be amazed at the dividends you'll get. And it looks like we have our fearless leader here to lead us to the promised land as we wrap up.
The promised land of 8 p.m. Yes, so we are at 7:56. So I'm going to come in and jump in and do a quick rapid fire here. Doug, I want to thank you for a very thoughtful, very well prepared interview with Chris. I know that I'm sure she appreciates that when on book tour, and it's nice. You guys obviously have a great deal of respect and camaraderie. So it's just wonderful to watch the interaction. So thank you so much for that. We appreciate it. I want to remind everyone that both Doug and Chris are going to be at after hours, both of them, answering questions, listening to your observations about the topics discussed tonight. You can access after hours by buying a copy of Chris's incredible new book. We're so glad to have hosted, and it's such great content. So we've been putting in links, so jump in. We're going to start that. We're going to give them both a 5-minute break. We'll be opening up after hours at about 8:05. Now, let me jump right in now. There was a question submitted ahead of time, and the individual is also here tonight, and she wanted to know, and the questions got a couple parts, so I'm just going to kind of condense a little bit, where she says, how do seniors in the pandemic without social community supports, how do they find some free social support in the pandemic? Churches are not providing social support of its biggest populations before and during. So I don't know if either one of you, I realize that might not be a specialty in terms of your knowledge base, but maybe if you had some thoughts about senior citizens who are feeling particularly isolated.
Yeah, I mean, Doug, I don't know if you have any particulars, but things that pop into my mind are, whether it's family, friends, letting people know so that they can keep them in the loop for, let's say, local activities. I think, so much has been online resources. So, getting involved in some kind of activity that they love, or, that kind of thing. But online communities have been great. Book clubs have been a source for people. I know people are involved in some of those. But yeah, I would say checking out your local community, given that people are looking, I think, to get out and do some in-person type stuff. Libraries, I know in my area, are doing some work. If you're around a university, they're wonderful resources for hosting all sorts of events, speaker series, college games if you're into athletics, but just a wealth of, whether it's the arts, whether it's anything else. I think that that could be one thing. And I think volunteering, so getting involved in, for example, schools or something where they're going to be around other people. Kids bring such joy, I think, and are so smiley and everything else. And we can't get enough of that, I don't think. So I think that that's a really good place to go infect yourself with their energy and spirit. And, those are just a few that come to mind for me.
Yeah,
Thanks.
I don't know. I'm here in Taos, New Mexico, which is a tiny little town. And, at our church, people are checking on all the seniors, and they're encouraging the seniors to find a way to lean in, to be helpful in a way that works for them, whether it's knitting, sewing, or a book group. But it's what I found interesting was it's along the lines of, what can you give? And in a way, something that you're good at, that you feel good about, what can you give? And who can you share it with? And if you think about it, as you do that, then you build relationships and you have an opportunity to connect with others. But I would go back to finding that unique thing that you can offer to others, and then it comes back to you. You sort of have to take the first step. And I understand that some seniors find that awkward, but you need to stay in your lane. And the things that are really, if you love to knit, my wife loves to knit. And so she started knitting things for various organizations, baby blankets and things like that. And all of a sudden, she's got a community of people who are all working on that together and supporting each other. So
well, thank you so much. We are out of time now. So Chris, did you want to close out here? Give you 30 seconds. You want to close out and say anything before we sign off and head out to after hours?
Well, I just want to thank Doug very much, and you, Lonnie, and the whole fan network for hosting this, and encourage people to come together. And because I do believe, as we just discussed, it is a way to move us from surviving to thriving. And so the power of community is something that I'll hold on to.